Okay, I want you to do something a little bit different with me today. Instead of me teaching you something, I want you to imagine sitting across the room for me. And we've just started a coaching session. So I'm about to ask you a question. So take a deep breath, get present with me, and really think about your answer as I ask this. When was the last time you felt invisible, despite being probably one of the most qualified person in the room? So I want you to take a moment around that. Think of maybe a specific instance, not like a general feeling or anything like that. A specific moment, a specific meeting, perhaps. So have you got it? Okay, now tell me what happened. Did you say quiet when you had something to say? Did maybe someone else say what you were going to say and that was credit for an idea that maybe you'd showed earlier? Did you watch as people were pulled into conversations and you didn't take that moment? So I want you to hold that for a minute because what I'm about to walk you through is exactly what I'd explore with you if we were in a room together right now. So this isn't a teaching episode. This is a coaching session. So if you're in for it, you're the client. Welcome to the Style and Strategy Podcast, where personal brand meets leadership and style. I'm Sonya, a personal brand and style coach who's been exactly where you are, juggling career and business success, personal growth, and finding a style that truly fits. After decades in corporate leadership, I've learned that showing up isn't just about what you do. It's about how you align who you are and how the world sees you. This season, I'm bringing you practical strategies, bold insights, and honest conversations to help you amplify your presence, unlock your next level, and lead with clarity and confidence. Let's dive in. So here's what I always ask in a real session. What did you tell yourself in that moment? What was the story? Let me guess potentially a few possibilities, right? I should wait for the right moment. I might need to think about this a little bit more before I say what I'm going to say. Maybe it doesn't matter. They probably already know what I'm going to say. Maybe I don't want to come across as aggressive or too forthright. Or maybe I'm a bit tired today and I'll let someone else take the lead on this. Does any of those sound familiar? Here's what I've learned after so many conversations. The story you tell yourself in that moment isn't random. It's actually a pattern. And that pattern has a name. So let me ask you this. Which of these 5 statements feel most true for you? Listen to all 5 and then notice if there's one in particular that lands. I wait for the perfect moment to speak, and then the moment passes. Maybe it's I adjust how I show up depending on who's in the room. I do the strategic work, but someone else gets the visibility. I prepare extensively and then struggle a little bit when things don't go exactly as planned. I'm really respected for the work that I bring, but I'm not always positioned for what's next. Got one? Maybe you've got 2. Maybe it's all 5, and maybe it's none of those, and that's okay. Whatever you've got, that is what we're working with today. So here's the question that most people don't expect. When did this pattern actually work for you? Because I have seen it again and again. You don't develop these patterns randomly. You develop them because at some point they kept you safe. They helped you succeed. They got you here. So let's walk through this together. If you chose, I wait for the perfect moment to speak, question for you, when did the waiting actually serve you? Perhaps it was early in your career. Perhaps it was when speaking too soon got you interrupted. Maybe it was when sharing an opinion or thought, it was sort of dismissed. When you learnt that being thoughtful and strategic meant always thinking before you spoke. That restraint built your reputation. It made you really credible, reliable, and someone who doesn't speak unless they have something worth saying. And that worked until you got to a level where waiting potentially reads as a hesitation, where silence reads as potentially uncertainty, where the person who often speaks first sets the direction and the tone in the meeting. So ask yourself, what would it cost you to speak before you're ready? That might be the fear underneath that pattern. If you chose, I adjust how I show up depending on who's in the room, when did the calibration serve you? It might have been when you were navigating spaces where you were the only one. Maybe it was the only female in the room. Might have been the only person of colour, or the only one without inverted commas here, traditional background in that particular room. Reading that room, whilst it is a critical skill to have, might have kept you safe. And then adapting kept you from standing out in ways that felt really risky. It made you professional, skilled at navigating those complex dynamics. And it worked, right? Until you got to that level where people are looking to you to actually set that tone, where consistency matters more than the adaptability, although that's still a critical skill, where perhaps your distinct leadership presence is missing. So I want you to ask yourself, who would you be if you stopped calibrating every time you walked into that room? That's really the identity question, as I like to think about it, underneath the pattern. So if you chose, I do the strategic work, but someone else gets the visibility, or someone gets kind of noticed around that. So my question back to you is, when did invisible influence serve you? And break that down, right? Was it when being visible felt risky? When perhaps taking credit felt like self-promotion? When you learnt that being indispensable was actually safer than being seen? And that actually being behind the scenes and the one who is putting everything together behind the background made you essential, trusted. The person who makes things happen without needing the spotlight. And it worked until you got to a level where capability without the visibility doesn't serve you any longer. Where the opportunities of people who have potentially both become more successful. It's not only those who are just good at what they do. So ask yourself, what are you protecting yourself from by staying behind the scenes? And that could be potentially the vulnerability underneath that pattern. If you chose, I prepare extensively and struggle when things don't go as planned. Question, when did the over preparing serve you consistently? Maybe it's always, right? Because preparation has been your superpower. That has been your edge. The reason you are so good at what you do. Being thoroughly prepared meant that you could never be caught off guard, never look foolish, never fail. And it worked until you got to a level where being agile mattered so much more. Where leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's actually about navigating when you don't. So ask yourself this question. What would happen if you trusted yourself to respond in the moment? That's potentially the control issue underneath that pattern. If you chose, people respect my work, but I'm not positioned for what's next. When did focusing on excellence serve you? It might have been from the beginning, right? You believed rightly that if you were great at what you did, then the recognition would come naturally. And I'm not talking huge fanfares and things like that, right? That good work actually does speak for itself, and it works until it doesn't. Until you get to a level where being good is the baseline, where the differentiator isn't just what you deliver, but how you're experienced. So ask yourself, what would it take for you to make your work visible without feeling like you're self promoting? That's the positioning challenge underneath the pattern. So now we know two things, right? What pattern you're potentially running and maybe why it developed, right? Because it served you once. Here's the next question. What is this pattern potentially costing you right now? Not theoretically, specifically. Let me give you some examples, right, of what I hear. I had the insight that I could have shifted maybe the entire project direction, but I waited too long. And now we're 6 months down the wrong path. Maybe it's people can't quite pin down who I am as a leader. I'm there, they know who I am, but I'm not really positioned. I'm experienced as capable, but I'm not distinct. Maybe it's I'm doing VP level work, but being paid and positioned potentially a rung down. And when those promotional roles come up or open up, they bring in someone external because no one saw me as that person. Maybe it's I freeze in high stakes moments when things don't go according to plan. And at this level, that could potentially make people question my judgment, even though I may be the most qualified person in the room. Or I watch less experienced people maybe get promoted, get board seats, get speaking opportunities, not because they're better, but because they're more visible. And I'm exhausted doing twice the work for half the recognition. And remember, this isn't about self promotion. So now tell me, what is your pattern potentially costing you? Be specific. Did I miss an opportunity? What role maybe you're not being considered for? What's the thing you're not saying out loud, but you know is true? And that is the cost. That is the cost that is going to increase the longer that pattern runs. So here's where the coaching session gets interesting. So if you're still with me, tune in deep now. Because most people come to see me thinking, I need to fix this pattern. I need to stop doing this thing. But it's not actually how the pattern shifts. The pattern shifts when you replace them with something better, right? You can't just stop something without replacing it. So here's what I'd ask you. If you weren't running this pattern anymore, what would you be doing instead? And let me walk you through what this looks like for each one of those particular areas. So let's talk about strategic restraint, right? Instead of waiting for that perfect moment, you'd speak with authority, even if your insight isn't fully formed. Maybe it's commentary like, here's what am I thinking when I hear this. I want to flag something before we go further. Maybe let me put something on the table that I think we're missing. Okay, yes, I've got some generic tones in there and commentary, but use that as a base to come up with your language, how you speak. The last thing I would want is for you to put words in there that don't feel like you, okay? So you get to the point where you trust that your expertise gives you permission to think out loud. That being strategic doesn't mean having to be silent and come up with the perfect words. Calibrating the room. So instead of adjusting to really match that energy, you bring your own energy into the space. You walk in knowing this is who I am, this is what I'm known for, and this is what you get when I walk in the room. I'm not talking arrogance or inflexibility, but distinctly the value you bring, the consistency, being present in that moment, that people experience you that same way, and that consistency really helps to build your leadership brand. The concept of that invisible influence. So instead of, putting all the chess pieces together behind the scenes, you come out a little bit more publicly, right? I'm really proud of how this turned out. Here's the approach I took. This was a really complex problem. Let me walk you through how we solved it. I want to share the strategic thinking behind this. So this is not self-promotional. It's about owning the contribution, your team's contribution without an apology. Then there's the whole concept of that preparation as protection. So instead of over preparing to feel safe, you trust yourself to navigate the uncertainty in real time. You prepare enough and then show up fully present, agile and responsive depending on what the room is bringing to you. When something unexpected happens, you trust your judgment in that moment. You're comfortable with saying, actually, that's something I need to go and validate, which is okay. You don't have to have all the answers. Like I've said in previous podcasts, some of the best leaders don't have the answers, right? And then there's the recognition gap. Instead of assuming that good work speaks for itself, you make your work visible in strategic ways, right? You send maybe the emails. You talk about your work without downplaying it. Because I know if you're in that circumstance, you do. It was nothing. It's just what I do. Can you hear the language? The downplay. You understand that positioning at senior levels isn't vanity, it is strategy, especially when you've got the goods, the credentials, the wins behind it, and the experience. So we're almost at the end of our session, and here's what I'd give you as homework. So today I wanted to create awareness, right? But awareness without action is just information. And you know, we've got so much information today in the world that we live in. And that information without doing some sort of application is not going to create any change. So if you're still with me here, my question to you is, what is one thing you're willing to commit to this week that would start to shift this pattern? Not 5 things, not a total transformation, just one thing. So to give you a bit of a head start, if your pattern is that strategic restraint, so maybe commit to speaking and saying something in the first 10 minutes of one meeting this week. Don't wait for that perfect moment. Just contribute early. Your voice matters in that room. If your pattern is calibrating, decide your baseline energy before you walk into 3 meetings this week. Commit to bringing that energy instead of adjusting to the room. You might be surprised how you bring the energy up. If your pattern is that invisible influence, own your role publicly in one outcome this week. When someone says great work, don't deflect it. Say thank you. Here's what I focused on. If your pattern is preparation as protection, deliberately under-prepare for one meeting. Now, don't get me wrong here, okay? I'm not saying don't do any work, right? Just prep that you're not over prepping, right? Find that middle ground and trust yourself to respond in real time. You know your stuff. If your pattern is the recognition gap, then make your work visible in one strategic way this week. Send an email, do a post on LinkedIn, tell one person about a recent win. Pick one, commit to it, do it, and then notice what happens, what changes, and what feels different. So if this was a real coaching session, I would say you came in with a moment where you felt invisible, and now you know why. You know which pattern was running, and you know what's costing you. And you know one thing you can do this week to start shifting it. That starts to create the shift and the change. One coaching session can give you awareness, but actual transformation, that requires sustained work and insight, because these patterns don't change individually. They shift when you have someone helping you to see that pattern in real time, a framework that addresses the identity, expression, and positioning together, and then accountability to help choosing differently when the pattern pulls you back, because it will. And that is exactly the work that I do. So if you recognized yourself in today's session, if you could name your pattern, feel the costs, and see what it would take, then know this, in a real session with me, you would go deeper. We'd map out what's underneath that pattern. We'd build a strategy that addresses those layers, the leadership identity, how you express it, and how you're positioned. And you really walk away with so much more than just awareness, but a clear plan. So as many of you know, I work with senior female leaders who already shift from the capable to being experienced and expressed with their own authority, with really their influence that matches their expertise and level. So if you're ready to do this work, then book in a leadership presence call with me, and you can DM me on Instagram or LinkedIn and we can have a chat. Because as I said, awareness is powerful, but the strategy behind it, the action and the implementation, that is what can really create the real shift. And if you have done this work as we've gone through and you've thought about it, let me know. Drop me a comment. Send me a DM. I'd love to hear how it's going. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next week.